which is like the best way to make money is to make money. And that's what they do. They make money.
And then they loan it out to the US government. So it's like this crazy, talking about it, you just feel like this crazy conspiracy, but it's not talked about because it's just so complex. And I feel it's so complex because at the end of the day, it's this private organization lending money to the US government, and then we got to pay for it. But they issued it.
Right.
So it's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard, and I forget who said it, but that the idea of the dollar of taxes isn't so much the revenue, because we're just spending so much and borrowing so much and printing so much money. The point of the taxes is more to make sure that we still keep using the US dollar.
Robert, welcome to the Rebound Talks, man. Pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I wanted to start, we were talking about you being a spinning instructor. How did you go from that to partnering up with Zappos and co-founding a company with them?
Yeah, I was really pretty down and depressed. The startup I had failed. I was going really big into debt, and I didn't want to do anything. And the only thing I thought I wanted to do was be a spin instructor, because it involves music and exercise and coaching, and there was no money in it, but I really just loved doing it. So I kept working on it. And I found that got me in the right body and mind space to just have energy and passion again. And that's when I started working on this proposal for Zappos. Crazy kind of long story how Tony and I met, and he told me about his plan for Zappos Insights, and I would just send him idea after idea, all this passion and excitement. They asked if I'd create a proposal for it. I did. We had many meetings and proposal revisions. And then finally they just let me come in and do it. And even I had a whole plan that I created. The plan was out the door, out the window, within weeks that I was there, because it's always different. Any job, any venture you get, it tends to go different once you're there and you realize the truth and what works and what doesn't. But yeah, I like to share that because I believe energy is one of the most important things. You want to be around people whose energy you really like. If you don't, doesn't matter how good they are, you don't want to be around them. So I think anything that we do to really build up that energy is just fantastic for any kind of venture or getting any kind of job.
So essentially, like corporate culture, I feel is like this collective energy that's created from working together, having this, motivation, intrinsic motivation, like motivating your workers without necessarily telling them to do something. They're just intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, I mean, you want that for yourself regardless.
Yeah.
And you want to hire people who have that regardless. If you're in the motivation game, you're really in a losing battle because it takes a lot of time and energy and effort. And so that takes more time to get to know yourself, to really understand what motivates you. It takes time to really get to know employees and recruits to make sure you really understand how they're motivated and what they do. A question I think people should ask in an interview is, tell me about when you took a project from start to finish. How did that go? How did you do that? And then you get the sense of how motivated somebody is on their own, because I don't think it's the kind of thing you can really train for very well.
So you were in this, you said you had anxiety, depression. So to get out of that mindset, what really worked for you was spinning.
Yeah. And I think the overall is getting into the body. It's so easy these days, especially with our phones and computers, more and more, to just be heads and minds rather than full bodies. So when you say something like the phrase embody leadership, that person embodies leadership. We're literally using the word body. So how is your body being involved in any format? That can be in nature, the ocean, biking, running, soccer, playing, whatever that thing is. I think it really requires the actual body. I call this our primary interface. In a lot of ways, the computers become a primary interface for most people, but in life, your body is your primary interface for how you interact. So how are you taking care of that body?
Also, are you paying attention to your body? Like a lot of us like living in the present, like living in the future and the past, and struggle to live in the present.
Yes.
And I don't know if like anxiety and depression are correlated with how much you live in the past or how much you live in the future, but it definitely appears that way.
Yeah. Anxiety is usually future related. Depression is usually past related. If you feel like, even if you feel like your past was great, but that there's no future, then you don't have so much anxiety, you have so much depression, right? But if you're really anxious about the future, then, that's thinking a lot about the future. And I think it's a balance of being at peace with your past and being thankful and grateful for your past and having a vision for your future. That's the ultimate balance that you want to have. If you're really depressed, you don't really have a vision for the future. And anxiety is actually not as bad as it sounds, because it means there's enough of a future to care about to be anxious. So why do you care? Why are you so anxious? Like, what's making you so anxious about the future? Because if you really were depressed and didn't care about it, and who cares what happens, you wouldn't be so anxious. So what is it that's really making you anxious about the future? And that usually comes across in some sort of conversation. It's not always in therapy, but therapy's great. It can happen with a coach, but it can happen with a friend. Sometimes it's better with somebody who you don't really know and can just be very open, because the people who love you and care about you have kind of a vested interest in you being happy. That's why I think people share with strangers and feel good about that, right? There's no pressure there. There's no nothing. So I think, one of my number one rules for cultures, it's co-created. The moment you're really by yourself and struggling is when things tend to go off the rails.
You did something which was also very interesting. I heard in one of your talks, you mentioned that you went in a sensory deprivation tank to like purposefully have panic attacks. How is that? Yes. Like, why'd you do that?
Well, my panic attacks were getting pretty bad to the point where I would go to the hospital. That's when you've had real panic attacks. If you honestly, fully, completely believe you're dying, that is a real panic attack. And so I actually had gone to the hospital several times just for them to tell me that I'm fine. And then I heard about a program called Panic Away that I thought was brilliant. They said, and this was a guy who would write letters as he thinks he's dying and would, if you've really had a panic attack, it's more than just fear. You literally think you're dying. And he said, what you need to do is when you're having it is call its bluff, count down 30 seconds, giving it a deadline. And if your heart's beating out of control, you actually literally say to your heart, beat out of control, kill me, go ahead, kill me. And that's the last thing you want to say or feel or do when you're in the midst of a panic attack. But I tested it out and it worked. Like, you count it down and you literally egg it on, because the opposite of resistance isn't acceptance. The opposite of resistance is welcoming. Right. So it's not just accept, it's welcome. It's bring it on. Hey, bring some more of it. Right. And I realized that I can't really predict when a panic attack happens, except I figured out that I could, because every time I went into a sensory deprivation tank, I would have a panic attack. So the first time I did that, it was really horrible because I was so scared. I got out midway through thinking I'm dying, of course. And then I was so out of it that I ran my car above a concrete edge and had to get $600 of repairs. And thank God I didn't hurt anyone, but I was that out of it. And I said, okay, next time I do this, I have to really commit to being fully in there no matter what. And I did. And then I got through it. And if I would stick through all the fear, at the end of it would be a pure peace. And I would do this several times a week for a few weeks. And then it started to come to the point where they were just gone. Like the process got slower, smoother and smoother. And to the point where, like, the last few times I got in there, I was just bored. And then it was so weird to actually be so bored that I missed the panic attacks. Because I started to realize there's a value to that adrenaline rush, that energy, and then the peace that comes with letting go. I mean, it's kind of like, you go skydiving and that's all that adrenaline, and then you're okay and you're on this high. And I realized to a certain extent, panic attacks were serving me in that purpose. They were giving me this adrenaline rush and then this pieced out, letting go of it. And then when I came to this place of just being at peace without it, not like bliss peace like it was after the panic attacks, but just general equalized peace. It's like, oh, okay, how do I choose my life from here now? Because this is the balance state. This is between the present. This is in the present, between the future and the past. Now, what do I want? And that's when you start seeing what's real versus what's being driven by emotions and reactions.
So we really want to get to that state that you were in after you learned how to control those panic attacks.
Yeah, it's really an equilibrium. It's this idea John DeMartini talks about a lot. He's a great expert on it. And that the idea is we want balance. The nature is based on balance. And if you imagine going too far to one side of anything and it being like a spring, it'll spring you back the other direction. You're on a high, you're going to be on a low later. And so he's saying that balance is where we see everything clearly. You can see, like, if you see marriage or kids clearly, you'll be like, you know what, this is great. And there's going to be some challenges and some tough parts, right? If you're like, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest thing ever, it's wrong. And also, if you think this is going to be the worst thing ever, it's also wrong, right? So if you find yourself in an extreme viewpoint or an extreme emotion, you're all out of line with that balance. And, you know, one of the tough parts sometimes for people is actually dealing with the higher part, because the low part, you're like, this sucks. This is terrible. I just got to sit this out or wait through it or find something that's going to excite me. Right. But when you're on that higher end, that exuberant end, you can make poor decisions from that place as well. The wrong investment, the wrong relationship, the wrong, you know, because you're on this high that you think is real. The thing I've noticed with both of those states is if you're in a really depressed state or a really kind of excited state, you have this sense that it's always like that and it's always going to be like that. And this is the real place, whether bad or good, but it's an illusion. It's really more in the balance where you can make good decisions and see the pros and cons, see the challenges and support, see, you know, the whole picture very clearly.
It's like now with the stock market and Bitcoin, everybody thinks it's going to go up to like 500,000 or 250,000. And everybody's in that super high before the low that will inevitably come. Nobody knows when, but sort of like the stock market also acts like ourselves somehow.
Right. And traders are always say it's emotions that do it. And the thing is, you know, if you're, for example, if you're going all in with a high amount of emotion, you might miss a price dip where you could have gotten a lot more, but you went in all in right that. So it could be that's still the great investment, but because you were on a high, the strategy didn't work out so well. So it's not that like you're on a high with Bitcoin and that like, oh my gosh, it can't be that great. It can be that great, especially if you do your homework and do your research on that and look into it. But what's the emotional state you're going into it with? And I found for myself with that, it's like, okay, if I were to sell everything and max out all my credit cards, that's an emotional state that I don't want to be in. That's a lot of risk. That's a lot of energy. That's a lot of management, right? But I also found that it created a lot of I don't know what the word discomfort is, not doing anything. You know, there's that nagging feeling of I should buy Bitcoin, I should buy Bitcoin, I should buy Bitcoin. It's like, so because of that, there's a natural medium where you start to find your level of investment, your level of conviction, and you say, you know what, this is the right amount for me. This is the right timing for me, and that's when you're able to really sleep well at night because you're acting according to your own alignment and your own conviction rather than an extreme.
And all this you learned from studying corporate culture. Before
life, this is just lots of hard lessons through life for sure. And John DeMartini's work I got to credit with a lot. My friend Lauren Seiden, who's a great coach who introduced me to it, that gave me the framework to think about better. But it was really life experiences that showed me this, the evidence. It's like DeMartini's got an interesting framework, but it's like, oh, that makes sense for all these different points in my life.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's experiences that teach us, not like a book or anything theoretical.
Exactly.
So talk to me about that experience that you created called the Expel. How'd you even come up with this experiment?
Yeah, I had the obsession with movies, and especially wanting my favorite movies to be real. And so I wanted the Matrix to be real, and I didn't know how to do it, and I couldn't find any red pills, and I found red Tic Tacs. I put them in prescription pill bottles. I took them to the world of make-believe called Burning Man, and people believed it and loved it and took it, had these kind of aha awakening experiences, myself included. And then I got back and thought that was fun in the game. And then somebody called me and said, hey, do you have any more of those? I'm like, why? And she said, I'm a psychologist and I've been giving these to my patients. They're having huge breakthroughs. And that's when I thought, okay, this is a joke that's become real. And I found red vitamins, and then I found people on Facebook who wanted it. And I put them in a group, and one by one, I had them take it for an intention. And one by one, it seemed to happen. People lose weight, get a relationship, all kinds of different things started to happen. And that's when I thought, okay,
how was it? How was the process like taking it for an intention, but did you have them go through a process?
Back then, as it started, no, it developed into a very clear process. But back then it was just take it every day, once a day for that intention. And it serves as like a memory device and a focus device. But after that, I started working with people individually. At first, it would take hours. But now it takes 10 minutes of this process to dial in your alignment. Like why do you want this? What will it give you? What's your intention for it? What's the movie look like in your life? It always comes back to that movie because you can visualize a movie. And so I developed this thing called the Expel activation process, and then done that on stage. I've taught people how to do it. And then I realized through it, it's really grounded in that mythology of the matrix of the truth, because I found it's more of a truth-telling pill than anything. Because if you say you want to do it because you really want to start this podcast, right? The pill, in a way, if you really are in alignment, you really want to do it. It's a weird way of unblocking the subconscious mind to give you that permission you've been looking for some reason, and saying, hey, you can do this, and you just take off and do it, and people have. But other times you're out of alignment with the intention, like a woman named Jennifer who had a $7 million business, and she took it and her business crashed. And I thought she'd be upset, but she was really happy because she said, now that my business crashed, I realized I hate the business. I don't want to be in this industry anymore. I want to start something new and different. And she was really happy. So to me, it's like, it's an alignment tool. It's a commitment test. It's a how badly do you want it? A lot of people will just hold it and not take it because they're afraid of getting what you want. That phrase, be careful what you wish for, especially when you put a pill in front of somebody, which by the way has nothing in it. There's nothing in the pill, just brown rice powder in its current iteration. And but when I put that pill in front of you and say, oh yeah, you really want it? Will you take this pill for it? People get it that once you take the pill, you can't take it back. And now you're on the hook. And now you've got to see what's on the other side of it. And now who knows what's going to happen in your unconscious mind, right? So it's I started first, I was marketing it a bit as a supplement, but now I'm changing the whole thing. I'm very influenced by Bitcoin and open source and these principles. And I want to open source all these protocols I've developed and help a lot of people and show how they can use it, and really use it as a cool way to connect conscious intention with the subconscious mind.
So how can we use it to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an activation process. We're revamping the website right now for expel.com, but really open sourcing it. You basically take this pill, and ideally with a partner, ideally with a witness. You say, you first really get in touch with the feelings, because I'll put the pill in front of somebody and say, how are you feeling? They'll say, I'm shaking. I'm just shaking in panic, right? And that's the resistance, and that's breathing through it. Yeah, usually all I do is sit and help them breathe through it to let it go. If it's really a strong block, I'll ask them to look in and say, what's that about? And then they'll tap in and they'll breathe in and they'll say, well, I'm actually scared of this, right? They want the relationship, but they're scared of all their freedom being taken away, right? And then that creates an opening for more of a conversation. Okay, well, do you still want a relationship? Do you want freedom within a relationship? Like the process itself just helps you understand what your resistance is and what do you want. And then saying, okay, I do want this. Well, then visualize it. What does it look like? What's your day like? How's your life different? How is this moment in the movie? Like, you are in your own red pill scene. How is this moment going to be different tomorrow? Right? What's going to happen? And that's just one of the uses for it. Then you take it, you swallow it by saying that intention, and you see what happens. But it's got like multiple applications, if you will. Like, I use it to access my intuition. When I was looking for 3 months for a dog, my friend said, use the pill, and I took this X pill, and I said, by taking this X pill, the perfect dog comes to me. Right. And the next day I met my dog, and it's like, how did that happen? 3 months of looking and looking and looking. I take this pill. I say the perfect dog comes to me, and the perfect dog comes to me. And the more I've done with this, the more it's like you start to question reality itself. Like, if you take the pill to start a podcast, you're like, okay, now I finally got the wherewithal to do it, and I'm going to do it. But you do something that involves something outside of you. It really starts to get trippy.
Well, what do you mean by that? When you do something that's outside of you, like taking the pill?
So like a puppy isn't inside of me. It's not control. I don't have control over that. Or I took it for whether to buy a house, and I had a vision of a completely different house when I took the pill. I said, do I sign on this house? And I took this pill, and I had a vision of a different house that didn't make sense till 8 months later when I saw that house. And I was like, oh my God, this is the house. So like, I was using it as Google querying my intuition or brain or God or whatever the explanation is, to ask what is this? So that's an application. You can use it to commit to something. You can use it to feel something. People have used it to feel peace or happiness, especially if there's an edge. Like, if I took it for happiness, there's not much of an edge there. But I've worked with people who, like a mom and wife of kids, who was so nervous to take it for happiness because all her life was dedicated to her kids and her husband. And the idea of taking a pill and her being happy, it triggered every nervous system in her saying, oh, wait, what if I'm happy and I leave, or if I go crazy, or if I like, all these fears come up, right? That's the edge. That's what I look for with the edge with it. For me, happiness, that's not an edge, but for her, it was a very big edge. And her taking it was this huge, incredible release by setting that intention, putting it in a pill, which symbolizes change and a commitment because you can't take it back.
And this thing of setting an intention, it's like all over, the old traditions. It's in the law of attraction now. Why do you think setting intentions for something? I don't know if I believe yet that something outside of yourself does happen, like law of attraction. I'm not saying it doesn't. I don't know if I believe it yet, but what do you think that works in terms of like, okay, I want to do this, but when you set an intention, you actually start doing it or start getting closer to it?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like, I don't know why setting an intention is something that's, so big in traditions and books and just in culture, really. Setting an intention sort of helps you achieve something, and it's not like a goal. What I don't understand is why setting an intention really, really helps with achieving.
I think it doesn't, because you can have the intention to eat healthy and not eat healthy. The question is, I think intention is actually less conscious than you realize. Like, so for example, you start this podcast, right? Let's say you said, I want to start a podcast to help college students. But what if, just to play with this, what if your intention was really to get a lot of praise? What if your intention was really to become famous? What if your intention was really to build up your talking skills, right? So your intention might not be the same thing as why you did something, right? So it, like, you thought the conscious intention is one thing, but you might have had a different intention. So I think intention doesn't work so well because to a certain extent, you don't even know your intentions. But what does work is commitment. So by doing this podcast, you committed by doing it. Nobody could say you didn't do this because you did it. Right. So you committed. Now, through that, you might learn, oh, I love helping people. Or, oh, you might learn, I love being a radio host, or I love talking to interesting people. And you start to realize your intention through the process. So I think intention as a word is actually in a lot of ways not helpful, because how many times have you had an intention and not gone through with it? The bigger question is, what have you done, or what have you committed to? And by committed to, I don't mean say you're going to do. I mean committed to, meaning like there's consequences. When I wrote my first book, there like with one of my books, The Culture Blueprint, there was a consequence. I announced it for a conference. I committed, meaning if I don't, there's a consequence. So a commitment oftentimes has a consequence where an intention doesn't. And action is obviously an action, right? So I think intentions, it's more on the level of subconscious. If you want real change, it's either through action or commitment.
Yeah, that's why I've seen you in your talks. Whenever they are setting the intention, they're doing it in front of a bunch of people. So now they have that commitment that they really need to get to the action, because a bunch of people are encouraging them or watching them and know what their intention is.
Yeah. And that's public accountability. That's the energy of the crowd. You're feeding on all the energy of that crowd, right? You're doing it in public. That's why I recommend doing it with somebody else who can call you out. Like when you do it with somebody else, you might be saying, I want to start a TV station. But imagine you're telling me you want to start a TV station. And as you're saying that, you're going like this. You're like, I want to start a TV station, right? And I'd be like, well, you're scrunching your face and you're scratching your neck. Are you sure? Tell me really, like, what's going on? You're like, well, it sounds like it's going to be a lot of work. And I'd be like, okay, you want to talk about how much work it's going to be? You want to let's see if you really want that. And you can tell if somebody is, if you said to me, I'm starting a podcast tomorrow, I'd be like, okay, I'm not even going to say anything. Right. But if you're like, I really want to start a podcast, I just don't have time. I'm like, what that usually is a conflicting commitment inside you. So you have one side of you saying, I really want to start a podcast. Another part of you is saying, I like playing video games and I don't want to do that, right? Or another part of you might be saying, I'm going to be really embarrassed because I don't like my voice, right? So what these are competing commitments. Like you're committed to sounding good, but you're also committed to the podcast. You're like, I can't reconcile these. I don't sound good and I want to start a podcast, right? Or I want to hang out with my friends and I want to start a business, right? So these are conflicting kind of commitments inside of you. It's this ambivalence. And it's ambivalence that keeps you neutral. Like imagine two boards that are lined against each other. They're holding each other up, but they're not stable. You could just kick one and it's done, right? So that's where conflict is in our mind. It's oddly comfortable because the thought balances the other. You can keep thinking about starting the podcast, but keep thinking about the laziness. And by not doing anything, you're actually in a neutral state, oddly enough. Once you go the other way, that's when it's like, oh crap, now I'm on the ride. Now I'm doing it. It's not so stable, but it's almost like you knock down those two and now you're building up a whole fire, which is going to take longer and more energy and actually going through with it. Right. So I think most people realize that the reason they don't do something is it's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just, you've got conflicting ideas in your head. You've got ambivalence in your head. You've got competing values. You've got competing commitments. And if you can resolve those and have one in front of the other, or the other option too, is just to say, you know what? I haven't done a podcast in 5 years. I'm declaring it dead. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to move on to something else. And you just destroy that pile of wood just intentionally, right? So sometimes it comes down to that we don't want to do it. It's rarely that we don't know how, because you can be resourceful and figure it out. If somebody had a gun to your head, you'd figure out how to create the podcast, right? Like It's usually not how. It's usually not even want. It's usually that there's a competing commitment inside your head.
And the way I found out to sort of clear this competing commitments is have this one purpose that you really look up to, that you really follow.
Ideally, if you can see that, great. I mean, one way to start to find that is this is a concept by Chris Smith of the Campfire Effect, who said, look back on your life at times when you said to yourself, that's when I realized ... Those lessons, those epiphanies tend to guide you toward your purpose. For me, it's oftentimes been about experiences themselves. My ahas were, oh my gosh, it's not the content, it's the experience. It's not even the pill like the Expel, it's the experience and everything around the pill. So that's the constant theme through my life, is basically creating experiences for people. I had a bunch of people over here at my house playing improv. That's an experience I created for people. I created the Expel as an experience for people. This thing I do called open space for companies, it's an experience. And I use the content, like I wrote the book on the Expel. The content builds up your knowledge, your how to, all those. It's like Bitcoin, it's like you build up your information and your knowledge and your experience with it. But the only way to truly do it is to have the experience, is to get it, is to play with it, is to do it. And that can be a little scary. But for me, I found that that's a string through my life by realizing all those moments. I said, oh, that's the moment I realized ... And you start to put those together and your purpose begins to form.
So you realize your purpose based on those aha moments.
Yeah. And for me, it's also taking what I think is from the future and applying it to the now. That's happened a lot for me. I think Expel is before its time. I think I'm going to do a lot with it later as I switch out, turning it into a real open source project. I was very interested early in the culture game. My friends and I started one of the first co-working spaces back in like 2000. So to me, it's this ability to read the trends of what's moving forward and how to apply it today in an experiential way.
So where do you see these trends moving forward? You've talked a lot about Bitcoin, about open source. Do you see it going that way?
Absolutely. Like my next book I'm working on is called The Decentralized Company. And it's all about taking principles of Bitcoin and decentralization and how we organize. That's a lot of what's on my whiteboard over here, about how we organize companies in a decentralized way according to the principles of cryptocurrency and decentralization and open source, because these things have proven they've worked. And a lot of what we do is we take metaphors from the world and nature and apply them, right? So money, oddly enough, at least before Bitcoin, is all water-based. Did you know this?
What do you mean by water-based?
anytime you talk about money, you're talking about water. So when you say you've got to liquidate your assets or freeze your assets, or you've got a cash flow or a revenue stream, or you need a rainmaker to create business,
make it rain.
Make it rain. Make it rain. Why are we using all these? They're all water-based because we don't really understand money, but we understand water. And so that's why I think the future with technology is we've constantly used metaphors for people. The church and the hierarchy of military has been a metaphor for companies up until the service age. In the service age, the metaphor has been sports and teams. We've got our coach, we got high performance, we're playing to win, we're doing all those things. The metaphors of sports are in companies right now. And I think that that's the big metaphor running companies right now. But like I said, I tend to think far into the future. And to me, it's going to be the technology, like the service age really drove the sports-like metaphors. And I think the information age, even though it's been a little while, we're only really getting used to it now. It's kind of like there were thousands of years of farming before they really figured out like the systems. So this is shorter. We're having like, of web since the 90s, more like 30 years of just trying to figure stuff out and maybe another 10 more. But as this gets really solidified, the metaphors of networks, of the web, of Web3, of how decentralization across the web, that's going to affect how we interact as people. So I'm taking the principles of that and applying it to systems theory and organizations, to how to organize a company, a unit, with these kind of things like these protocols and principles that come out of the realm of really in a lot of way open source, because open source started Bitcoin started the crypto world, right? Cryptography was in there. It mixed all these technologies together. So taking the principles of these and saying, okay, how would this apply to organizing a network of people? And that's the next body of work I'm working on.
Yeah, and I don't think any one company can be open source. Like, look at Wikipedia, look at Bitcoin. Like, not one company has enough resources like a properly executed open source project has.
Not yet, at least.
Yeah. Do you think the future of companies is decentralized?
I do. Up until a point, I think only full decentralization, I think, can only be really organized by computer, because otherwise you've got little pockets of centralization. Like, the big mining pools have some centralization to them within Bitcoin, right? There are people who have edit control on the GitHub code. There's a little bit of centralization there, right? So I think it's more like an aspiration that you get close to without fully hitting it. I mean, you could take something like TCP/IP, what drives the web, and say that's fully decentralized, but that's a computer code. That's a program. Like, I think a computer code and a protocol, that can be fully decentralized. But as we start to move into humans, I think that we're not entirely decentralized. I don't think at this level. You don't have 18 hearts in case one fails, and you got a node heart in case that heart fails, right? Like, our bodies aren't so organized entirely that way. There's some centralizations going on, but I think that the principles of it guide us to creating it in a way that mirrors it. The same way money is not water. Money isn't water, but it is. It's that kind of thing. It's going to be decentralized, but you won't find it to be purely, totally decentralized.
Do you think that it's going to be more Bitcoin running the show, or some other crypto running the show, or central bank issued digital currencies running the show?
I think it's all of them. I think they've all got different use cases. So I think Bitcoin is the most decentralized, with the biggest network effect, with like the strongest kind of code base to do what it does. It does store a value very well, even in terms of just transactions and a lot of other things. It doesn't do so well. You need other technologies on top of it, but at its core, a store of value, it does great. These other ones like smart contracts and things, they do things well. That doesn't necessarily mean they're great stores of value. So a smart contract that works on Ethereum or one of the other programs, it may do some functions on this network really well, but it might not be the best store of value, but it can execute on those functions. And with government currencies, there's there's a diversity, the same way that there was a gold standard, but a lot of different currencies. There can be a Bitcoin standard, but a lot of different currencies. So the US might even literally start their own new currency, but backed by Bitcoin potentially. So I think there's room for everybody in this ecosystem. At the same time, there's like 8,000 coins out there, and there's going to be a lot of damage done. There's going to be a lot of dead bodies. There's going to be a lot of people who get wrecked on their money. The deeper I do it from an investment standpoint, I see Bitcoin being very, very strong and safe compared to the others in that realm. And with the dollar potentially inflationary, I see it as a good bet. But I encourage everybody to do the research and look into it and read it. My biggest regret, I will tell everyone, because I only got into it this year, and I could have gotten into it when it was like $40 a coin. And funny enough, I realized my regret is not buying in, because I didn't have the financial literacy. It would have doubled and I would have spent it all, right? Yeah. I'd be like, I doubled, and I would have made a bunch of errors, right? And maybe I would have gotten rich and I wouldn't have developed this great career I had, right? So I'm not upset that I didn't put the money in or invest. I'm upset that at each of those points, I never said, you know what? I should read a book on this.
Yeah.
I should like talk to some people and walk through it and really, really learn. That's the part I regret, because that's this time in the cycle I decided, like there's so much to learn here and understand. But it's one of those things where if you don't understand it, investors classically say, if you don't understand it, don't invest. And that's what I didn't do. I didn't understand it. I'm not investing. And this time I chose to understand it and learn and experience it. Now I'm playing from my own knowledge, my own learning, my own experience of using it. And that, I think, is the best way to make a decision, is not from, usually without it, it's an emotional decision. And that emotional decision can work well. Some people did no research and from the beginning just said, this is the future. I know it. I love it. And they're doing pretty well. Maybe they didn't have a lot of money for a while though, too. I mean, and maybe they went through an emotional roller coaster seeing the price go up and down. But the point is, I don't regret not investing anymore. I regret not educating myself.
Yeah, I'm a maximalist myself, because in the previous bull run, I invested in a bunch of shit coins, made a lot of money, but lost a lot of money too. Yeah. So after that, I realized that the one that's gonna see it all the way through, I don't know if it's gonna be, the one that controls everything everywhere, but the one that's gonna see it all the way through is definitely gonna be Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And what do you think that says about like human nature and corporations and where we're heading as a species, that now we are starting to, tinkle with the idea that we might completely change our monetary policy worldwide? Like, do you think as a species, we're just more open-minded now than we were before? Or what do you think that says about us?
No, I mean, I think it's a really good question. I have no idea, to be honest. I have no idea what the future is going to hold. I think it does. I think the things that people don't realize so consciously is that there's this interplay between culture and technology. And culture might create the idea for technology, but it's the technology that's going to change behaviors. It's somebody had the idea for a car, but everybody having a car changed our behaviors massively. I mean, just the difference. Imagine the difference of going from car to not. Like, imagine everybody on the streets walking by, saying hi, etc. Right? And then you've got, people in these little boxes, right? Or an even invention like the iPhone. Remember, it went from like everybody just kind of walking down the streets to everybody's got white things in their ears and nobody's talking to each other. So I think that what gets underestimated is how much technology impacts culture. But there's a lagging effect. And it's the people who can predict it and move it forward and say, oh, I see how this is going to impact us this way, this way, this way. I can see it from a non-emotional standpoint, from just a grounded, centered standpoint, because it's easy to get too excited and it's easy to get totally depressed that you think robots are going to take over the world. Right. So it's more seeing those trend lines of saying, that's what it was for me, was like, oh my gosh, Bitcoin keeps going up and up and up. And then I talked to the people who told me it's going to be that we're still early. And that's where it caught my attention. And that's why, wait, what? I thought I am out of this game, right? And so it's one of those things where it brings you in with the money. But then if you're willing to take a look, especially books like 21 Lessons I Learned going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you start to realize like, this is beyond money. This is going to change how we operate. The same way the web changed how you operate. Bitcoin as money and crypto as money is going to change the way that we operate and how we spend and what we spend on. And my personal hope is that money goes to good things. I saw this commercial for this product on Instagram, and I was like, that thing's going to be dead in a year. Why did they invent that thing? Nobody's going to use that. But there's so much money flowing around that any silly idea can happen. But when you start thinking in this way of Bitcoin, where you say, okay, my money is going to be worth so much more later. I want to hold on to it. I want to save it. I only want to use it for things that are really important. And so my hope is that as this gets to become more of the standard, that more money, that we're less of a consumer type of economy, and that more money gets put into really important things that we need as a whole for society. That's my hope, at least. I think it won't necessarily come with a lot of turbulence. But I think, personally, I think Bitcoin is very empowering, where something like UBI, Universal Basic Income, is disempowering. I'm not saying I want people to starve. I think those of us, I'm more of a free market capitalist who believes that there are people like me who do not want to see people starve, and we'll fight against that, as opposed to relying on the state for that, right? But I think that universal basic income is this. There's this human nature idea of that we don't tend to value what we're given for free. We just don't tend to value it, and also there's not a lot of dignity in it. Like, there's a lot of dignity in having a job. That's why I've been hearing a lot of suicide rates in Asia happening from people not having jobs. Because I think jobs are dignity. You did something, you earned something for it. And there's a sense of dignity in that. And, I used this example. It hit me, this example, talking about it when I was a little kid, like 10 years old. And I went to my grandmother's crystal shop, beautiful, expensive crystals, to buy something as a gift for my mom. And, rather than, she's not going to charge me $300 for this as a kid, but she's also not saying, I'm going to give this to your mom. She said it's $10. And I was like, oh, great. I have $10. And I felt so good spending that $10 and seeing my mom, I got you this great gift, right? And how would I have felt about that if my grandmother just gave me it and I gave it to my mom? I wouldn't have felt proud of it, right? So I'm concerned about this whole idea of let's just give money people to live, not because it's a morally incorrect, but because I'm worried if you take people's dignity that way, if they don't have a chance to be something they're proud of, we could see a culture of more depression, of more like, what's the point? Of more, I'm tired of even switching through Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Like, what am I actually doing? And people believe, people will do art and projects and this and that. And some people did that during COVID. A lot of others, like me, got really depressed and just sat down and did nothing. So that's where I hope it goes, is that the more people who understand the fundamentals of crypto and self-sovereignty and being in control of having impact on money and knowing how money works and learning the history of money, it's really exciting and very empowering. So that's what I hope for. I didn't get a single class in finance as a kid. I think that would have been helpful. And I think there's a chance to educate kids on this now, and for the next generation to do some cool stuff.
For sure. And it's so complicated for a reason. I mean, I guess we're not taught about it so much because at the end of the day, it's really just a piece of paper that everybody gives value to. It's not backed by anything anymore. So if a lot of people really start realizing that, then that could shake the system up, I guess.
Well, it's not, I think backed by something is an interesting word. It's not backed by a form of value in the positive sense. It's backed by a form of value in the negative sense. Like, if you don't pay your taxes, you could see your bank account drained. It can happen, right? If you, or something else can happen to you like that, right? So like, and also what currency does the US government accept taxes in? US dollars. So there is And like and then worldwide, the whole petrodollar and that, we've got a huge military enforcing this standard. So I actually challenge the notion that the dollar's not backed up. It's backed up, but it's backed up by sticks instead of carrots.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's backed up by the US government, by the military. But essentially, if everybody just stopped believing in it all at once, then it will be worthless, just like anything else. So
yeah, but it's not gonna nothing's gonna happen all at once.
Yeah.
And if they did, they'd still need a way to trade. I mean, that you take money down to its core, it's barter. And money solved the issue of I need something that he wants, but I need to do an 8-way exchange, right? So money cured that at first in the form of gold, which was this real hard fungible asset. People then started shaving down the gold, and that's when we started to realize currencies can be debased, and that's when empires go down, like Rome, when they started to cut down on the coins. And then the dollar, gets loaned out at all these exponential rates. So it's it's this system that's gone out of control.
For sure. And it's especially the Federal Reserve. I really don't understand how it works. And I guess it's just not common knowledge of what it does, how it works. When do they issue? When do they not issue? Do they do it as they please? It's complicated.
It's all a game. It's a huge game. Most people don't realize the Federal Reserve is not a government organization. It's regulated by the government, but it's an actual private corporation. So who's running the US dollar is a private corporation. And they, I just thought of this phrase for this funny project I want to do, which is like the best way to make money is to make money. And that's what they do. They make money.
And then they loan it out to the US government. So it's like this crazy, talking about it, you just feel like this crazy conspiracy, but it's not talked about because it's just so complex. And I feel it's so complex because at the end of the day, it's this private organization lending money to the US government, and then we got to pay for it, but they issued it.
Right.
So it's crazy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard, and I forget who said it, but that the idea of the dollar of taxes isn't so much the revenue, because we're just spending so much and borrowing so much and printing so much money. The point of the taxes is more to make sure that we still keep using the US dollar. And that it stays in use that way. And the interesting thing about the history of it is that it used to be illegal to create your own money. People were arrested for like creating their own form. And just in your community, you're like, I'm going to have a form of money in my community. You could have gotten arrested for that, and people did. But the revolution with Bitcoin was you've got somebody who you don't know who they are, who created a computer program like the internet that goes around and works. And so there was no person to sue. There's no company to sue. There's nobody to go arrest. Like, even if you found them, even if you're like, these are the three creators of it, like you could shoot them in the face. It won't stop a thing. Right. Like, so Bitcoin changed everything because it was, rather than humans creating this form, a protocol, even though humans created the protocol got set in stone in a way and verified by all these nodes that it would be extremely hard to change it. It would take a lot, and everybody would essentially lose a lot of money if they changed it. So it's the first time that somebody created like this system where it's oddly, I would say, not illegal to create the money, because it's computer code, and computer code is words, and words are protected under free speech. So, and you don't know who to go arrest. So, people have gotten in trouble with securities offerings now with coins. If you're like have an unregistered security offering, but that's you and a company and you're doing it. The thing was, is as a security offering, you're taking money and you're saying there's a chance you're going to make more money. That's a security, right? But with Bitcoin, what happened was there was no money taken. It was a system of mining through these computers that created the money. So because they actually there were exchanges that were created, but to get in the system, you didn't need money. It's like literally the way they mined for gold and found gold, right? So all these other things were scams because they said, give us your money and then you'll have this thing, they'll get you more. But Bitcoin is one that just got created as a form of money, and people put value on top of that. And that's why it has value. So in a way, Bitcoin it's that irony. It's like it's backed by nothing, But and some people have called it a Ponzi scheme. But what's usually true about a Ponzi scheme is that you get into it and then you want to get out, and they say, "Hold on, we got to figure out where to get the money," and then they figure it out, blah 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 blah, and you get out, and somebody else comes in, but it's not like that. This is treated like an actual. It's closer to a commodity than it is to a Ponzi scheme, especially since there's a limit. There's a limit to the number of coins, and they're very divisible. So it's growing like a Ponzi scheme, but the structure of it is way more like gold or hard money.
And also, I'm not sure if I'm 100% right in this, but I've seen some charts, and it's like when currencies were created, like fiat currencies, they also went up in price like crazy, like Bitcoin, and then they stabilized at some point. And that's what some people say is going to happen with Bitcoin. At some point, it's just going to stabilize at a certain price amount, but it's not going to be anytime soon, because even if it gets to the same market cap as gold, it'll be worth like 250,000. That's what people are banking on, at least myself, because it makes sense that Bitcoin would replace gold eventually.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And there's this crazy theory that I think I've heard the Winklevoss twins talk about it. That is that if Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or or Virgin Galactic, all these people that are going to space somehow manage to capture an asteroid with a bunch of minerals, with a bunch of gold, for example, the price of gold is going to plummet because we're going to have so much gold. This is obviously like some sci-fi shit, but potentially it could happen in the next 30 years.
Right. Right.